What's up, friends and foes? Welcome to Let's Get Nerdy. My name is Corey, and today I'm here to talk to you about Season 2, Episode 6 of The Last of Us, otherwise known as The Price. We open up this episode with young Joel and Tommy, young Tommy, not old Tommy, but young Tommy, with young Joel in particular looking like Emil Hirsch from Speed Racer, covering up for young Tommy to hopefully adverse, to protect him from their very clearly abusive father, played by Tony Dalton, who tells the story of his own dad, Joel's grandfather, hitting him, kind of a moment of him abusing him and humiliating him in front of others, and then rationalizing it to Joel that although yes, he hits Joel and he hits Tommy, and sometimes he might even go too far, as he puts it, he never hits them or does what his dad did to them, almost rationalizing that of, he recognizes he does bad, but it's not as bad, which I think is, such a ending his part of the scene kind of with or ending the whole thing, I should say, just with a line of, I just hope you can be better than me, right? I think is such a powerful punctuation with, which obviously comes back later in this episode in particular, and I just thought, in a show about zombies or infected or whatever you want to call them, this is just such a genuine real world scene to establish the tone of this episode, and it's just a fucking amazing cold open in a show that consistently has amazing cold opens. From the very first episode, these cold opens are just always a treat, just because this whole show is a treat. Then we get the intro this time. We do get the two fungal silhouettes of Joel and Ellie appearing together, indicating that this will be a Joel and Ellie episode, or a Joel and Ellie heavy episode, as the preview from last week would have indicated. And a good chunk of this episode is spent telling the story of Ellie and Joel's relationship through the years, kind of in snippets of Ellie's birthdays specifically, and kind of the events that transpire on that day or around that day. We start with her turning 15 at Jackson Hole, and you get that great scene of Joel fixing up the guitar, whittling the bridge from bone, and using the Dremel, as he put it, to etch the moth into the end, the fret inlay. I thought this was a great scene. I also love the scene of Joel geeking out about how versatile a tool that the Dremel really can be. Which, yes, a Dremel is a great tool if you've ever used one. And then you do get, Ellie and Tommy come bursting in through the door, with the reveal that Ellie has burned herself. Probably, you gleam too, she has burned her bite off to hopefully, wear short sleeves again. And, I like that it's not necessarily a thing that's spoken about, that, Joel kind of gives her a look of immediately understanding or kind of putting two and two together. This is then followed by Joel giving Ellie the cake and guitar, and we finally, when she gets the guitar, asks Joel to play something, and we finally get the scene of Joel singing Future Days by Pearl Jam, which I think I've said this in a previous episode when I've teased it before. That doesn't track. Future Days, I believe, came out in 2013, and the HBO show started in 2003 in terms of the in-world timeline. So, doesn't really make sense that he's playing Future Days unless Joel Miller happened to know Eddie Vedder, and Eddie Vedder happened to have that in his pocket for over a decade before it ever came out. But I don't think anybody actually cares, because it's a very beautiful holdover from the game, and truth be told, I'm not even a Pearl Jam guy. Like, personally, I don't like Pearl Jam. But it still hits for me. It hits for me in the game, and it hits for me in the show, and it even hit for me at the 2020 Game Awards when not Pearl Jam, Eddie Vedder played it. The ending, and then ending the whole thing with Joel letting Ellie know that he understands why she burnt off the bite, and kind of letting her know that he's cool with it, I guess is the best way to put it. I don't know. I thought it was just a very touching way, kind of a father and daughter-esque moment. And then they skip to Ellie turning 16. We get the sequence that I think many of us who played the game were really looking forward to probably the most. It's the field trip to the museum, which was, I think, pulled off spectacularly from the initial conversation walking up, Pedro, I almost said Pedro, which is accurate. Joel asking Ellie if somebody's ever had the birds and the bees conversation with her, and her saying, "Oh, do you mean
dicks and vaginas?"
Which I just thought was great, very indicative of kind of the in-game conversation when you're exploring things. I love that moment. And then let's see, and then Ellie first seeing the dinosaur and climbing up to the top of it, I thought was a great moment. But man, really, like, the shuttle sequence itself is just, what a fucking scene that was. From the reveal of the shuttle, Ellie choosing the helmet just like they do in the game, and finally getting like seated in, playing of the tape. Just, I think everything from game to show really was captured perfectly in a season where they really captured a lot of moments one-to-one from game to show, and they've nailed that vibe. This is a scene in particularly that they really got it right, that it just brought out the emotion of like you were playing the game for the first time, and seeing Joel look at Ellie with just this beaming with pride of what he's done for her in this moment. I just thought was such a wonderful moment, playing the tape, getting to see the real world kind of drift away for just a moment in time to, or the real world of The Last of Us, I should say. Seeing all that drift away to the illusion of space, I thought was just such a wonderful, awesome moment. And, I think all of us all of our inner child, or, all of our inner children, or however you want to put that, at least mine, I will say, harbors extreme jealousy for just never having a birthday that might be as cool as, climbing into an actual Apollo space shuttle and feeling like you're taking off. It's just such a cool fucking moment. I'm so glad they nailed that vibe perfectly in this episode. And now we get age 17, all the teenager shit at once, which, this is the seeds of Ellie either needing her own independence or letting her resentment of Joel lying come out more and more, or I think maybe a bit of both, kind of, I guess at this point her suspicions of him lying, not necessarily the confirmation of him lying, but definitely the need for independence. As with her, you get the scene of her abruptly deciding to move to the garage in the middle of the night after getting caught fooling around, getting tattoos, and smoking weed, which, fun fact, is also the answer to the trivia question of what are 3 things that I definitely did not do at 17. I mean, come on. Last of Us was my favorite game. I saw Force Awakens 5 times in the movie theater in high school. I was not getting invited to parties, so Ellie is now officially cooler than I was. And still am, really. Anyways, self-deprecation aside, I do love the scene because I do think it introduces the friction developing between Ellie and Joel, obviously particularly from Ellie, and Joel kind of, the way I interpret it was fighting the fear of losing yet another daughter, but in this time in a completely different context, right? Of like kind of the she is outgrowing him and she's not the 14-year-old Ellie he met at the beginning of this journey, but also a little bit in the context of, I don't know if at this moment, but eventually in the context of her learning the truth. And with Joel ultimately then ending the scene relenting that, allowing her to move to the garage and asking her to just give him a few days to get it set up. I think I kind of, again, interpreted that as him ultimately relenting, and as an attempt to let Ellie be her own person, but still keep her close, both literally and somewhat figuratively, by, she lives right out by the garage. And again, just a fucking great scene. I love this scene. I love this episode so far. Then, after a brief scene with Catherine O'Hara telling Joel that moths are typically a symbol for death, we get Ellie's 19th birthday. We start off with Ellie practicing confronting Joel about the Salt Lake City event. But before learning she will be joining Joel on her first patrol, and whilst on the patrol, whilst on the patrol, we do get the radioing about another patrol getting attacked by the infected, and we get Ellie insisting that she joins Joel with the line, "I'm not your fucking kid, Joel," which seems like it could have a few different meanings in that moment in time. Like, first off, I'm not your kid on this patrol. I'm your partner. We need to work together. We don't break up. But also maybe one of those moments of, from the first game, you're walking on mighty thin ice. But we get another great scene, if you can believe it, with the character Eugene, who was previously mentioned in the first episode of the season and was mentioned a little bit in the game. Catherine O'Hara's, or Gail's, husband, who reveals to have been bitten as he runs into Joel, and heartbreakingly begs to see his wife one last time. And Ellie immediately jumps to convince Joel to let him see his wife for one last time, even if it's not the smartest thing to do. Of course, Joel promises to meet Ellie at the trail with the horses to bring him back to meet his wife for one last time, before Eugene's demise. Which I do want to say, this is such a great moment. That specific moment of, Joel promising to Ellie that, they'll get Eugene back to Gail to say goodbye. I think it was a really good moment great moment of acting for Bella Ramsey, because I think she showed on her face really that this was a moment of this is the test. If Joel's lying about this, he's for sure lying about Salt Lake, right? This is kind of the one last, are you who you say you are, Joel? And I just thought that was a kind of a great setup. Even, obviously Joel was lying, and obviously, for better or worse, it was the smarter thing to kill Eugene there, but just the act of Joel lying about the promise is obviously kind of what broke everything down in this moment in time, which you do get a just fucking heartbreaking scene of Joel walking Eugene to the water, and as soon as Eugene sees the view, he understands what's going on, and just the way he just pleads that he needs Gail, and Joel, responding with if you love someone, you can always see their face, and just the terror, and then the peace in Eugene's face. It's just a fucking beautiful, heartbreaking scene. I don't know what else to say about this. This scene was just it was heartbreaking and beautiful, and those are the only two things that I can think of to say right now, because that's the only two ways really to describe this scene. Fucking good stuff. I do want to say I do think what is kind of a interesting allusion is to the quote, if you love someone you can always see their face. I think is a great allusion, kind of again to Joel's biological daughter Sarah, and a little bit even maybe Ellie forever seeing the face of Joel when he was beaten to death. Kind of uh, obviously, I think Joel would be literally alluding to the fact that he always sees Sarah's face, I imagine, and then alluding to the fact that Ellie is probably now forever has to have the vision of Joel's bloodied face, like burned inside of her as the last time she's ever seen Joel. So I think that's a really, I I thought that was I thought that was a really kind of cool allusion to both moments. I also think I could be reading too much into it, but I don't think I am. And this is followed by them bringing the body back to Jackson and Joel again, lying to Gale that in his final moments that Eugene wasn't scared, he was brave, and he even ended it himself. And then Ellie, having finally confirmed to herself that Joel was lying about everything, including Salt Lake, that which I want to say, I actually think this scene works really well as a replacement for the scene in the game where Ellie ventures all the way down to the hospital in Salt Lake City and investigates herself. I think this comes with a lot more of an emotional weight, especially within the universe the show has built. I think the show has really gone out of its way to establish that this version of the Last of Us world is different from the one in the game. Not necessarily, obviously, in a multiversal way, but this is a different collection of characters. This is a different world they live in than the one in the Last of Us video game itself. That's how I've interpreted it, at least. And again, I think this comes with a lot more of an emotional weight, with the argument that I kind of got the feeling that Gale probably knew the truth. Anytime she's shown up in these episodes, she can kind of see through people's bullshit pretty easily. So I feel like this is a moment she probably knew the truth, but Joel telling her this lie kind of gave her the permission to believe the more palatable lie than the truth that Ellie lashes out with, and not allowing her to have that lie, not allowing her to live in that world, whether it's a real world or not, and for better or worse, telling the truth, and forever altering how she now has to see Joel and has to deal with Joel living in this, community with them. Again, whether or not Joel did the right thing, the lie then dissolved all of that. And I think ending the scene, especially with Ellie specifically recalling the "you swore" line and not saying "you promised," I think helps, and it's showing that Joel immediately, I think, understanding what she's saying by specifically saying "you swore." I think it was just all really good touches, and creates such a heavy moment in this episode to really understand where Joel really leaves us to where Joel and Ellie are at the beginning of this season, in episode 1 before the barn scene, which we do get we get glimpses of Joel's side of the barn scene as he's watching, Ellie and Jesse talking, and then eventually Ellie and Dina dancing, and we also get the brief conversation between Joel and Maria of where Maria praises Joel for everything he's done for the community of Jackson Hole, just seconds before he dusts Seth and gets yelled at by Ellie for dusting Seth. And this leads us to the fucking porch scene, which I think the porch scene, I think aside from Joel's death and maybe the museum scene, is the most anticipated scene in the season. I think for people who play the game, it kind of packed the biggest emotional punch, but Um, and I won't necessarily bother regaling the scene kind of bit by bit like I've kind of have with some of the others from this episode. Um, I would say just go fucking watch it because it's such a good scene. It's just as good as it is from the game. And Joel and Ellie, Pedro Pascal, Bella Ramsey, they have such a good chemistry of like it just seems like every scene they're in where they're at, one of them's acting their asses off, it elevates the other. I just think this scene is brilliant. It's just as brilliant in the show as it is in the game. It may even be a little bit more so, because Pedro Pascal, particularly again, I mentioned I think Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey have a wonderful chemistry together. I think they really help each other bring out like their best performances. But Pedro Pascal, throughout this whole episode, just acts his absolute ass off. And I've said that about, I think, one person, and I think I've said that so many times throughout the season, but just this episode particularly, I know awards don't matter, but goddamn, give Pedro Pascal that Emmy right now, because there's not another performance that I think can even touch this in TV right now. I'm not saying ever, but right now, this is just such a fucking great performance. Even throughout this episode, I mean, you get Bella Ramsey, Catherine O'Hara, Tony Dalton, Joe Pantoliano? He's in Bad Boys, I know that. All giving just these fantastic performances, but just Pedro Pascal specifically just manages to get that extra level, particularly in this scene, just on his, wearing the emotions on his face of the shame of what he did and what he's done in Salt Lake City, the shame of it, and more so the fear of losing Ellie by telling her the truth that not only did he do these actions, he doesn't regret them. He may be sorry, but he doesn't regret them, and he would do it again because he loves Ellie, and he's now, Ellie, he views Ellie as his daughter, whether that's right for him to do or not, I think there is an interesting conversation to be had about the idea that maybe because Ellie never had a parental unit, so maybe she doesn't fully understand what that means to have a parental unit. Joel had a daughter roughly Ellie's age, and so he may be superimposing that role upon Ellie, even without her permission. I think it creates for a really interesting conversation, and with Joel here, just again to reiterate, saying like, I'd do all that shit again. I'm not sorry. I should say he is sorry, but he's not. He doesn't regret it. I just think this is such a masterclass of a scene, in terms of writing, acting, presentation. It just really, totally, I think, caps off Joel's story really well. If this is the last scene, especially ending, his part of the scene with the line of like, I hope you can just do a little bit better than me, kind of. I feel like it indicates he feels he's part of the same cycle that his father, or he gave into the same cycle that his own father did, even if that's, whether that's true or not, he feels that way. It's just all great stuff that go watch the scene. If you haven't, I don't know why you're here. If you have watched the scene, go watch it again because it's just such art. It's just beautiful. I fucking love that scene. And man, this whole episode was just magnificent, I'd argue it might even be the Bill and Frank episode of this season, There's no real infected attacks, there's no WLF or Seraphites, there's really nothing in Seattle. We get the little bit of glimpse of Ellie going into the theater at the end of the episode, which who knows what that's implying there. It's just all real fucking human emotion and interactions, and it's the weight of this world they live in. Obviously, the Eugene being bit obviously is kind of sci-fi horror stuff or whatever, but it's still like all based in genuine human emotion and interactions, and just it's again magnificent is the only word I can really think of to describe it. It's worth mentioning Neil Druckmann did direct this episode, and it makes sense because this episode's just fucking awesome. This might be my favorite episode of the season, which is crazy again because there's really no action. There's really no huge set pieces or anything like that. It's just everything you want from The Last of Us, right? It's dragging you down to the emotional depths, but also giving you some really cool moments in between. And if this is the last episode to include Pedro and as his portrayal of Joel Miller, it's such a good note to end on. It's such a great note to end on, just because I love Troy Baker. I love Troy Baker's performance as Joel. I see that as but this version of Joel Miller is Pedro as Joel Miller. I think fucking just come on, he did such a good job consistently, and I don't know what else you can say other than he just did a fantastic fucking job. And it again, if this is the last we see of him, that's The Last of Us seeing Joel. I don't know if that was an attempt at a pun or not. I'm sorry about that. I just loved all of it. I loved all of it, and it's we have one episode left of the season, and I'm very excited to see how we end this season. Obviously, if you've played the game and you're we have a feeling we know where we're ending this season, but there's a lot to squeeze into if we're going to get to that ending. So with that, I cannot wait for next episode. I cannot wait for season 3, because I feel like this adaptation just consistently is knocking it out of the park for me. I don't know if there is from source material to the adaptation that I've enjoyed as consistently as The Last of Us. It's just fucking awesome. I think and you know what? Join me next week to see if they keep the streak of knocking it out of the park going. For now, I gotta get to bed. It's very late, and I'm yelling in my living room. I'm not yelling. Well, I think at 2 a.m. the definition of yelling becomes a different definition. Anyways, with that, I will see you next week with more Last of Us content. Thank you very much. Till then, I gotta get back to nerding out.